This secret Mopar transmission part you never knew existed. A 50-cent spring turned Grandma's Fury into a tire-smoking monster. Today we're exposing the 727 TorqueFlite accumulator spring, the forgotten mod that separated street racers from posers. Smash that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment about your favorite hidden performance trick. The birth of a legend. The year was 1962. Chrysler just unleashed something special into the automotive world, the A727 TorqueFlite, a 3-speed automatic transmission that would become legendary for one simple reason. It was virtually indestructible. Built around a licensed Simpson planetary gear set, wrapped in an aluminum case that weighed 160 pounds, this transmission was engineered to handle everything Chrysler could throw at it. And we're talking about the company that built the 426 Hemi, the 446 Pack, the 413 Wedge, engines that made torque numbers that would twist lesser transmissions into pretzels. The 727 got its gear ratios locked in from day one. 2.54 to 1 in first gear, 1.45 to 1 in second, direct drive in third, and a stout 2.21 to 1 in reverse. These ratios never changed through 3 decades of production. Chrysler nailed it the first time. But buried inside that cast aluminum case, between the front and rear servos, sat a component that looked so insignificant most people never gave it a second thought: the accumulator piston. And sitting either above or below that piston, depending on the application, was a simple coil spring. This wasn't some high-tech marvel. Just basic spring steel, maybe 6 inches long, weighing a few ounces. The kind of thing you'd find in a hardware store for 50 cents. But this little spring was the gatekeeper. This was what decided whether your 727 shifted like a performance transmission or felt like stirring concrete. Here's how it worked. The accumulator piston sits in its own bore in the transmission case. When you shift from neutral or park into drive, hydraulic pressure builds in the system. That pressure hits the accumulator piston, and the spring underneath cushions that initial engagement. It's like a hydraulic shock absorber, specifically for that breakaway moment when the transmission first grabs. The factory setup used a soft spring. Chrysler engineered this transmission for your aunt's coronet, not for drag racing. They wanted smooth, gentle engagement that wouldn't jolt passengers during the morning commute. Perfect for the suburban crowd? Absolutely wrong for anyone who wanted their Roadrunner to actually feel fast. The Chrysler Compromise. Walk into any Chrysler Plymouth Dodge dealership in 1968 and you'd see the problem right there in the showroom. A gorgeous Charger RT with a 440 Magnum sitting next to a Fury station wagon with a 318. Both had essentially the same 727 TorqueFlite. Chrysler faced an impossible challenge. They needed one transmission to serve 2 completely different masters. In the muscle car, it needed to handle brutal torque and survive repeated full-throttle launches. In the family hauler, it needed to be smooth enough that nobody complained about harsh shifts during the school run. So Chrysler spec'd that soft accumulator spring. Gentle engagement, cushioned shifts, no drama. The result? Your 440-powered Charger launched with all the aggression of a rental car leaving the Hertz lot. But here's the interesting part. Chrysler engineers weren't ignorant about performance. They knew the accumulator spring controlled shift quality. In fact, different applications got different springs. Some 727s had the spring below the piston, pushing up. Others had it above the piston, pushing down. A few high-performance applications, particularly the 446 Pack and 426 Hemi cars, sometimes came with no spring at all or a much stiffer unit. The catch? Chrysler kept this knowledge buried in parts manuals and service bulletins that most people never saw. There was no advertisement saying, "Upgrade your accumulator spring for better performance." If you wanted your Mopar to shift with authority, you had to figure it out yourself. And that's exactly where the street racing community got creative. The backyard discovery. By 1969, word was spreading through the Mopar underground like wildfire. Transmission shops were discovering something interesting. When they tore down 727s from high-performance cars, police packages, and heavy-duty truck applications, the accumulator setups were different. Some had stiffer springs, some had the spring positioned differently, and some, particularly from factory race cars and police interceptor packages, had no spring at all. Just the piston, no cushion. Nothing to soften that initial engagement. The modification became stupidly simple. Drop the transmission pan, 14 bolts. Unbolt the valve body, 10 more bolts. Pull it down carefully, and there it was. The accumulator piston sitting in its bore, usually with a spring underneath it. Pull that spring out. Toss it in the parts bin. Button everything back up. 20 minutes of work, if you knew what you were doing. $30 in gaskets and fresh fluid. First test drive and suddenly, your Plymouth grabbed gear like it had been kicked. That soft, lazy engagement, gone. Now it hit with authority. Not violent enough to break parts, but firm enough that you knew the transmission meant business. This became the ultimate sleeper modification. Picture a bone stock 1970 Satellite. Factory hubcaps, quiet exhaust, bench seat interior. Nothing about it screamed performance. But inside that 727, someone who understood hydraulics had pulled that accumulator spring. Light turns green. The Satellite launches. Instead of that mushy, soft engagement that lets the engine bog, it grabs hard and clean. First gear winds out to $5,000. Grabs second with a bark of the tires. That Chevelle SS next to you with the cowl hood and slicks? He's staring at your taillights, wondering what just happened. The beauty was reversibility. If you didn't like how it shifted without the spring, 30 minutes and $8 got you back to stock. Want to try a stiffer spring from a truck application? Hit the junkyard, find a wrecked D200, pull its 727 accumulator spring, and experiment. This was garage science at its finest. No dyno sheets, no laptops, just basic mechanical understanding and a willingness to turn wrenches. The science behind the snap. So how exactly did removing or changing a simple spring transform shift quality? Let's dig into the hydraulics. The accumulator system in the 727 works on basic physics. When you shift from park or neutral into drive, the transmission needs to engage the rear clutch pack and the front band simultaneously. That's a lot of mechanical action happening at once. Without an accumulator, all that hydraulic pressure would slam those components together instantly. You'd get a harsh, jolting engagement that could break parts and definitely upset passengers. The accumulator piston and spring act as a cushion, allowing pressure to build more gradually. The factory spring was deliberately soft. When pressure hit that piston, the spring compressed easily, slowing down the rate of pressure increase. The transmission engaged smoothly, gently, almost apologetically. Remove that spring entirely, and suddenly there's nothing to slow down pressure buildup. The instant you shift into drive, full line pressure hits those clutches and bands. Engagement becomes immediate and firm. Not harsh enough to damage components, but aggressive enough that the car feels completely different. The really clever builders took it further. Instead of just removing the spring, they'd install what's called an accumulator blocker rod. This was a solid piece of aluminum or steel that replaced the spring entirely, preventing any movement of the accumulator piston. Zero cushion, maximum firmness. Others experimented with springs from different applications. Truck 727s had stiffer springs designed for towing duty. Police package 727s sometimes had specialized springs tuned for pursuit driving. Mix and match these with passenger car pistons, and you could dial in exactly the shift feel you wanted. But here's the critical part that separates the smart builders from the parts breakers. The accumulator doesn't affect the 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 upshifts. That's a common misconception. The accumulator only cushions that initial engagement from neutral or park into drive or reverse. For firmer upshifts, you needed other modifications. A Transgo TF2 shift kit to change valve body calibrations, stiffer springs in the valve body itself, higher line pressure. The accumulator modification worked best as part of a complete system, not in isolation. And there were risks to going too aggressive. Remove the spring entirely without proper valve body modifications, and you could cause harsh engagement that damaged thrust washers, broke planetary gear components, or caused wheel hop that stressed the entire drivetrain. The key was balance. Firm enough to feel aggressive, not so harsh that parts started breaking. Most experienced Mopar builders went with either a stiffer spring or a carefully sized blocker rod, rather than running no spring at all for street use. The complete system approach. Here's what separated the weekend tinkerers from the real transmission masters. They understood the accumulator didn't work alone. It was part of a hydraulic orchestra, and changing one component meant retuning everything else. The smart builders never just yanked the accumulator spring and walked away. They'd also install a proper shift kit. Transgo made the legendary TF2 reprogramming kit that became the gold standard for 727 performance modifications. This kit changed valve body calibrations, increased line pressure, and firmed up the actual gear changes. They'd adjust the throttle valve linkage for more aggressive kickdown response. Maybe swap in a higher stall torque converter to match the engine's power band. Adjust both transmission bands to proper spec so everything worked together without slipping. The governor got attention too. Stock 727 governors shifted at moderate RPM for fuel economy and smoothness. Performance builders would lighten the governor weights or install a high RPM governor kit to hold gears longer, letting the engine reach its power peak before shifting. When done right, the car would be perfectly civilized putting around town. Smooth, idle, gentle shifts in traffic, no drama whatsoever. But nail the throttle, and it transformed into something savage. Shifts hit like hammer blows. The engine stayed in its power band. Acceleration that made big block cars nervous. That was the holy grail. A transmission that could drive to the grocery store on Tuesday and embarrass Corvettes at the Friday night races. And it all started with understanding that simple accumulator spring and how it interacted with every other component in the hydraulic system. The best part? Complete reversibility. If you went too aggressive and didn't like the results, you could swap components back, try a different spring, add the blocker rod, remove it. The 727 became your playground for experimentation, all for the price of gaskets and weekend wrenching time. The modern revival. By 1991, when the last 727 TorqueFlite rolled off the production line in a Grand Wagoneer, conventional wisdom said this technology was dead. Electronic overdrive transmissions with computer controls were taking over. The era of purely hydraulic automatics was supposedly ending. Except nobody told the hot rodders. Today, 727 TorqueFlites are more popular than ever. Hemi swaps, LS conversions, modern Coyote engines making serious power, and builders still choose the 727 for one simple reason. It's bulletproof, rebuildable, and completely tunable through mechanical means. No laptops, no software, just springs, pistons, and hydraulic pressure. And that accumulator modification? Still one of the first things performance builders address. In fact, it's better now than it's ever been because we understand the science deeper than those garage mechanics from 1969. Modern transmission shops aren't just pulling springs and hoping for the best. They're engineering complete solutions. Companies like Sonax and Superior make billet aluminum accumulator pistons machined to tighter tolerances than Chrysler ever achieved. These modern pistons feature improved sealing, precision machined surfaces, and designs optimized through decades of racing experience. Accumulator blocker rods are now available in different lengths and diameters, allowing builders to fine-tune exactly how much cushion remains in the system. Want zero cushion for drag racing? Solid blocker rod. Want some cushion for street manners but firmer than stock? Shorter blocker rod that limits piston travel without eliminating it entirely. Some performance transmission shops catalog dozens of different accumulator combinations, each tailored to specific applications. Building a street-driven 440 Charger that needs to be wife-friendly? There's a setup for that. Building an all-out drag car with a 572 Hemi? Different combination, same basic principle. The beauty is that modern builders stand on the shoulders of those Mopar guys from the golden era who figured this out with nothing but hand tools and mechanical intuition. Why it still matters. Here's what nobody talks about regarding the 727 accumulator spring. It represents something we've almost completely lost in modern performance culture. The ability to fundamentally change how your transmission behaves with basic tools and mechanical understanding. Today, automatic transmission tuning means plugging in a laptop and flashing a TCM. Click some buttons, spend $1,000. And yeah, you'll get results. It works, it's fast, it's reliable, no question about that. But there's something fundamentally different, something almost spiritual, about crawling under your car with a wrench and a drain pan and making a mechanical change that transforms how your car behaves. The accumulator spring teaches you about hydraulic systems, about pressure curves and shock absorption, about how mechanical components interact to create the feel of a transmission. It forces you to understand what's actually happening inside that aluminum case, not just trust a computer to handle it. And when you nail it, when you find that perfect combination of spring rate, valve body calibration, and line pressure that makes your car shift exactly how you want it to, firm enough to feel aggressive but not so harsh that it breaks parts, that satisfaction is something no software download can ever replicate. You feel connected to your transmission in a way that's been lost. You understand its personality. You know that when you shift into drive and feel that firm engagement, it's because you tuned it that way. You made those decisions. You did that work. The 727 accumulator spring never got magazine covers, never had feature articles written about it, never got the recognition it deserved. It just sat there quietly doing its job, a simple piece of spring steel that most people never knew existed. But in the hands of those who understood it, this little spring changed everything. It turned grocery getters into street terrors. It gave birth to sleepers that embarrassed muscle cars and exotic sports cars alike. It gave everyday Mopar enthusiasts the power to tune their transmissions with precision for the cost of a tank of gas and a Saturday afternoon. And it's still doing it today. Still teaching a new generation of builders that sometimes the simplest technology, perfected over decades of experimentation, beats any high-tech solution you can buy. The 727 TorqueFlite was in production for 29 years. Think about that. 3 decades of the same basic design, barely changed, because Chrysler nailed it the first time. That accumulator spring was part of that brilliance. Simple, effective, tunable. So the next time someone tells you that you need expensive parts and computer tuning to make your transmission perform, remember the accumulator spring. Remember the Mopar guys who pulled a 50-cent piece of metal out of their 727s and suddenly had transmissions that shifted like they had something to prove. Remember that the devil is in the details. And those who master the details, they're the ones leaving everyone else behind, wondering what just happened. The best modifications are often the ones nobody sees, the ones that don't require shiny parts or big price tags, just knowledge, tools, and the willingness to understand how things actually work. Next time, we're diving into another forgotten piece of performance history, the Ford C6 Intermediate Servo, the heavy-duty secret that turned Lincoln and truck transmissions into drag racing weapons. Make sure you subscribe, smash that notification bell, and share this video with your fellow Mopar enthusiasts. Drop a comment about what hidden performance secret you'd like us to uncover next. Until then, keep building, keep learning, and remember that sometimes the most powerful modifications are the simplest ones. The ones that cost less than your morning coffee, but change everything about how your car performs. Now get out there and make some magic happen.